A clay pot, a bowl of grain. Two objects define tonight's lesson, a clay pot and a bowl of grain. You stand at the threshold where rumor meets record, asking what those objects really mean. The phrase death by rats echoes from pamphlets and street tales, yet the documents in front of you speak with careful silence. What is performance, what is punishment, and what is the motive behind both? You hold your breath because sometimes silence is the loudest proof of intent. Picture this, a courthouse yard after dusk torchlight trembling along stone. Period records cite a strict rule of law, a line that hides more than it reveals. Officials assemble a table, a seal, a signed decree. Somewhere nearby, a box sits covered with cloth, and a crowd understands that fear is the first witness. They lean forward not to learn a method, but to learn a message. Imagine the consequence, a mass of faces learning where the boundary of order lies. You smell lamp, oil, hear boots, scuff, feel the hush when authority reads a charge. If a living creature enters the story, what does the city hope to teach the living by threatening severe harm to the condemned? The answer matters more than the tool. Punishment here is not a machine, it is a mirror held up to the crowd. Here's the reversal. The more you study the chronicles, the less the legend holds. The accounts turn vague at the moment of supposed spectacle. Some describe display, not detail, deterrence, not method. The gaps speak loudly, perhaps louder than any reenactment you have heard. What the page refuses to say becomes the heart of the tale. A single scratch breaks the air. It could be a rat or only rope on wood. The crowd startles at the noise, then settles reminded that imagination is cheaper than proof. You look for what's certain. Cities fought infestation, granaries leaked, dockyards swarmed, rats were hazard and metaphor cited in municipal orders long before rumors of capital outcomes. Sanitation laws expanded with trade, fear traveled with cargo. The bowl of grain becomes a civic emblem, protect stores, protect stomachs, protect order. Safety begins with storage, and storage begins with trust. Another image returns a sealed container heavy on a table. You ask why leaders referenced vermin at all. Fear teaches quickly, disgust moves a crowd even faster. Officials knew the grammar of public ethics, demonstrate a boundary without drawing its darkest line. Threat is theater, restraint is policy. The less you show, the more the mind supplies. Philosophy surfaces, a culture reveals itself not by what it loves, but by what it shames. Dignity is measured at the edge of power, where a captive cannot answer back. If the lesson needs terror to land, the teacher should be judged before the student. Justice without mercy becomes a lesson that unteaches itself. A clerk unfolds a parchment. The text says little, but it says enough. No device to be described, no blood to be shown, the sentence to be carried out without cruelty according to law. You notice the evasions, the way language polishes steel until it reflects the reader's face. The city wants obedience and deniability at once. Words become shields where facts would wound the eye. In the gaps, policy survives. In the details, a reputation dies. So, what did people actually see? Most likely an arrangement that signaled danger without staged gore. Perhaps a covered pot placed to frighten. Perhaps a lesson sounded through rumor more than sight. The public learned, the record stayed clean, and memory did the rest. Later, storytellers stitched fear and law together and called it history. The crowd exhales as the magistrate turns away. The bowl and the pot remain unexplained like props after a canceled play. You step closer, searching for what the page refuses to say. A stain on the cloth. A grain trail across the wood. Suggestion does the work that spectacle would have done. The emptier the stage, the fuller the imagination. You find a margin note in a later hand, citing merchant complaints of spoiled cargo rat-bitten at quay. The punishment narrative crosses with a shipping dispute. Economics, not cruelty, sharpens the city's voice. Where trade meets fear policy, grows teeth, and rumors grow faster than wheat. The grain bowl now points to tariffs, storage fees, and angry guilds. Which leaves one question burning under the quiet. If fear alone could steer a crowd who needed spectacle and who invented it later. A distant chronicle hints at an imported method, but never shows it. Another decree bans all public displays with animals for human dignity. The pot is still on the table, the bowl still smells of grain, then a sealed letter arrives from upriver claiming the crate was not empty. The letter names a warehouse master, a night watch, and a crate that rattled when no one touched it. The sealed letter smells of river mud and lamp oil. The bowl of grain still sits on the table, the clay pot turned upside down like a question you cannot lift. The crate in the letter rattles in your mind louder than any crowd. A single grain clicks against the rim sharp as a pin. If the magistrate accepts the tale, the city relaxes for one night. If the magistrate rejects it, the dockside may ignite over tariffs and lost cargo. Anxious guilds whisper that order must speak with a hard voice. Calm fails fast when mouths fear empty bowls in the heat of noon. But the letter hides a knot. The merchant claims a night watch, heard movement inside, then admits the box might have held only sacks and scrap. He blames a clerk for misreading a mark, then blames superstition for the rest. The story slides as soon as you press it, and each excuse leaves a stain. You carry the letter through the warehouse district, past ropes that creak and scales that never sleep. The key smells of wet wood, yeast, salt, and stale fish. Lanterns sway above ledgers on hooks. Each page lists weights, fees, and complaints that sound like weather. A single kernel cracks under your boot. A foreman leads you to the warehouse master. He wraps the letter in cloth before he reads, as if the words might stain. He frowns at the seal, then traces the tariff codes with a blunt thumb. If this crate held vermin, he says it broke law and reason. We keep traps in corners, not in public tales. The night watch stands by, the door hat in hand, eyes on the floor. He swears he heard scraping a dull thud and something like breath-finding room where none existed. He adds in a smaller voice that boys sometimes throw pebbles to startle the rats under the planks. Noise travels faster than truth on water. You flip ledgers and tally columns. One fee repeats across the season, a vermin loss surcharge paid by ships that moored late or near refuse, and the surcharge rises with each week of shortage. A guild petition sits beneath it, arguing for frightening displays to stop pilfering and calm the market. When policy meets panic, truth sells at a discount. In the accounting room, you map the surcharge across ship names and dates. The same brokers appear near every spike-smoothing rumor into advantage. A clerk slips you a note. Foreign grain lighter than declared arrives after sundown with stamps that smudge like fog. The math hints at theft that wears fear as a cloak. You return to the courthouse where the magistrate studies the same letter. He sees a grid of choices, none clean, approve a display that hints at severe harm and risk turning rumor into law. He asks what the crowd will accept as justice if he refuses theater, and you answer that images travel farther than corrections. The bell marks noon, and the decision will define what strict rule of law sounds like for a generation. A translator arrives from the river gate with a foreign chronicle. He says our word for crate shares a root with a foreign word for pen, and the foreign scribe loved double meanings. He warns that the imported method might be a metaphor for corruption hidden in plain sight. On paper, a rat can name a thief who knows the grain routes better than the guard. A jurist arrives with an older decree copied in a careful hand. It forbids public spectacles involving animals for human dignity, then orders quiet sentences conducted without cruelty according to law. The jurist argues that restraint kept peace longer than fear ever did. He places the decree beside the bowl of grain, and the contrast speaks louder than threats. Behind a closed door, a council gathers at a battered table. Merchants demand a sign that bites, even if the bite lives only in the mind. Priests press for confession, and fines not staged dread. Rain starts without warning, and everyone looks at the ceiling as if the roof could answer. Outside, the crowd gathers for answers. Guild elders whisper that fear needs a shape, even if the shape is a covered pot on a table. Dock workers shout for wages that hold value by morning. Priests ask for dignity before theater, law before song. Ink dries too slowly for a crowd. The magistrate steps into the yard with the letter in his hand. He could stage a frightening symbol and buy one night of quiet. He could refuse theater and read the ban on public vermin spectacles, daring the city to trust words over rumor. 2 doors stand open, and only one may close the day, and the silence before his first word feels longer than winter. Rain keeps time on the courthouse beam while the letter dries beside the bowl of grain. The yard smells of wet rope and ink. The magistrate's voice has not returned, so you turn to the ledgers that never blink, even when the square outside tilts toward noise. Numbers, unlike crowds, keep their tone. First, the mystery. The surcharge column swells whenever rumors roar. Each spike matches a night of display, the kind where nothing is named and everything is implied. If fear can move a balance sheet, what else can it purchase? The pattern repeats like tide charts pinned to a wall. Then the consequence prices rise in the market the morning after each assembly. Porters bargain, harder shopkeepers cut loaves thinner, and the guard requests hazard pay along the quay. An invisible cost drips into every bowl in town. Hunger does not read decrees, it reads prices. Here's the reversal. The ledgers show no expense for any device. No carpenters billed, no handlers hired, no cleaning crews signed. Where the tale wants detail, the books stay spotless. The absence feels deliberate, like a clean stage after an unfinished play. You trace the ink with a fingertip and circle the same 3 brokers whose margins widen at each surge. Their notes travel with the grain, and their gossip moves with the tide. Petitions stamped with careful wax repeat the same drumbeat frightening displays. Strict rule of law, public example, yet none asks for method. Each asks for mood, a chill that can be staged without stains. The more anxious the port, the easier the premium. Last year's dock fines tell a quieter story. A modest ordinance penalizes late mooring, open sacks, and careless storage. Revenue jumps after the first display, then smooths as warehouses add guards and lids. In a margin, a junior scribe once doodled a rat tail, 3 quick strokes, a joke with teeth, only to scold himself beneath. Write law, not animals. Improvement followed not from spectacle, but from seal, and schedule from lids that close tight and clerks who counted slow. Philosophy rises with steam from damp coats. Deterrence without mercy unteaches justice. Mercy without order unteaches safety. A just city must neither parade cruelty nor hide theft behind theater. Replace care with symbols, and policy becomes a mask that eats the face beneath. Fear should warn, not rule. Law should hold, not perform. The jurist returns with abstracts from neighboring towns, and you map them against local reports. Each record describes the same choreography: covered objects, formal reading, no spectacle, and where officials kept it brief and symbolic disturbances faded. Where rumor outran, the record stones flew. Clarity calms, detail panics, because rumor loves gaps and crowds love theater. A translator unrolls a foreign chronicle on oiled cloth and taps 2 words. In that language, crate can also mean pen, and vermin can also mean traitors. The metaphor bites harder than any animal would. The scribe adds that several pages are missing, and that mistranslation loves a gap, a hole in the page where certainty should sit. You return to the surcharge sheet and circle 3 dates. On each, the same broker filed weights lower than the harbor scale recorded, and on each, a pamphlet warned of infestation the night before. A complaint about gnawed sacks appears in the broker's own hand the next morning. Fear is a currency, and someone is minting it spent in whispers and redeemed at the scales. The magistrate steps in as the rain thins to mist and the grain bowl gleams under the lantern. He reads your annotations, closes the ledgers with a flat palm, and says, "We cannot buy order with rumor, each mark a thread pulled from a crowded tapestry. The market bell will ring at first light, the city expects a decision, and stallholders will test it with the weight of mourning." You send for the guild elders and lay the foreign chronicle beside the petitions. They arrive with damp sleeves and careful eyes. You ask why their petitions wanted frightening displays instead of better locks and seals. They answer with old stories of theft and scarcity and the need to steady hands at dawn. 2 guards shift by the door as the air tightens. The side door opens, and a senior elder scar on chin voice like gravel asks that the record capture his words plainly. He says the guild fed the rumor at the start of the season to force tighter storage rules and higher inspection fees because fear was useful. He stares at the bowl of grain, then admits the rattling crate might have been boys throwing pebbles at the planks. The room chills, and the magistrate lifts the foreign chronicle with 2 fingers as if the page were heavier than wood. Mist threads the yard where rain has thinned, and the ledgers rest shut. The bowl of grain holds its quiet line, and the foreign chronicle waits face down. The guild elder's confession still hangs in the air like damp wool. You move to the map wall because pictures of trade.com arguments that words ignite. First, the mystery. Why do neighboring towns report the same choreography? Covered objects, public reading, swift dispersal, careful language. Different seals, same script. If fear were local, why is the theater regional? Then the consequence, whenever the script travels, prices jump the next morning. Bakers slice thinner guards, ask more, and harbor clerks collect surcharges with apologetic smiles. The market responds faster to rumor than to rule. A pattern with profit will not retire. Here's the reversal. The cleanest records belong to the strictest towns. The ones that banned animal displays for human dignity also kept the lid on unrest. They read the decree, showed the symbolic props, then shut the square before songwriters found a chorus. Threat without spectacle proved stronger than spectacle without restraint. You open the Foreign Chronicle and mark its margins with 4 small dots. Crate can mean pen, vermin can mean traitors, and the scribe loved riddles that read 2 ways at once. Mistranslation traveled by boat like spice and rumor. A metaphor that punishes corruption became a legend that punished bodies. Maps on the wall, dates in the margins. You draw a line from the upriver port to 3 towns on the bay. The same month that pamphlets mention rattling crates, the customs office begins stamping lighter cargo as received in full. The gap between declared and real weight widens with every retelling of the tale. Someone learned that fear oils the hinges of the gate. A courier enters with dried broadsides from those towns. Each uses identical phrasing, strict rule of law, public example, no device described. The chorus repeats and crowds fill the spaces between the notes. Where the text stays, general storytellers improvise. The jurist points at the bands again and clears his throat. He argues that restraint did not emerge from softness, but from prudence born of bad nights. When leaders faced shortages, they learned what theater could cost. The less they showed, the more the audience supplied. The more the audience supplied, the more the ledger swelled. You assemble counsel in the records room and stack the broadsides, petitions, and maps in one frame. Someone jokes that a city is a stage with rent and fear is the cheapest set. No one laughs. Dignity is expensive because it refuses shortcuts that stain the page. Philosophy returns with the smell of damp linen. Institutions prefer symbols that leave hands clean and minds crowded. Mercy applied early saves more than it spends. The city's face is clearest when it looks away from spectacle and toward repair. You test the imported method claim against shipping books. The dates of the Foreign Chronicle line up not with executions, but with tariff changes and grain diversions. The method appears when supply falters and disappears when stores recover. A story that terrifies citizens turns out to be a tool that disciplines traitors. A translator raises a finger and reads a clipped stanza from the Chronicle. The riddle names a pen within a box and thieves within a pen. It fits a courtroom before it fits a dockside crate. The punishment in the text is civic, not physical. The sealing of accounts, the closing of routes, the penning of fraud behind rules. 3 ports, 1 rumor. You step back and see the script as a traveling solution, not a local cruelty. Leaders borrowed a performance that promised calm without stains, and profiteers borrowed the rumor to tax the frightened. Where the ban on animal displays held order held 2, where the rumor outran the ban, pamphlets sold out before noon and bread shrank by dusk. The magistrate studies your lines and circles 2 intersections on the map. He murmurs dates under his breath, then taps the foreign port of origin with the back of his pen. The Chronicle's metaphor, the surcharge spikes, and the broadside's language all share a week. The week a convoy was delayed by fog and customs rules changed mid-river. A clerk slips in with a final bundle, trade letters stamped from the foreign port on the very day the Chronicle claims the method first arrived. The letters list ink, paper, and printing plates, not devices for staging harm. Dates collide with routes and the imported cargo looks like a press, not a crate. The Chronicle names the ship by a bird's name and a schedule shows its sister vessel is due at dawn. Dawn finds the sister vessel easing in gulls, tracing slow loops over the quay. The trade letters list plates and ink, not instruments yet. The alley behind the press hums like a hive about to swarm. First, the mystery who conducts the rumor when no one holds a baton. Ballads surface by noon, each with a line about a rattling box and a knight that learns obedience. If no statute prints the method who keeps the chorus in tune, then the consequence prices edge up before the market bell finishes ringing. Bakers cut corners thinner, stevedores demand an extra coin for hazard, patrols drift past doorways where pamphlets change hands. A city that sings the same fear spends the same coin twice. Here's the reversal. The loudest verse comes not from law but from song. Street singers rhyme crate with fate, grain with chain, and the crowd adds details the record refuses to write. Tales grow teeth in melody, not in minutes of court. A boy whistles a fragment and a whole row of stalls hums along. Paper travel. You step into the printer's shop where trays of type sit in wooden drawers like quiet soldiers. The printer wipes his hands and shrugs. He prints broadsides that say, strict rule of law, nothing more. He gestures at the press, at the ink, at the invoices, stamped with the same seals that float through the ledger room. He prints what sells, and what sells is the same general phrase repeated in polite type. You buy a handful of sheets anyway and listen at the door. The alley edits the text in a murmur. A singer swaps public example for living feast, and a hush follows like a curtain pulled quick. The phrase moves too smoothly as if someone fitted the rumor with wheels. At the quay, a peddler offers ballads with woodcut rats as border flourishes. He swears the image came through the convoy, same week the Foreign Chronicle landed. The wood blocks are clever, never explicit, just silhouettes and grain sacks, a lid, a hand that might be a magistrate's or a thief's. The crowd reads the space between the lines and fills it with breath. You visit a tavern where dock crews eat and trade songs. A foreman slaps the table to the rasp of a verse about justice that feeds the hungry watchers. You note the rhyme, the rhythm, the places where the room leans in. That is where policy loses to performance. That is where rumor earns its pay. Two women in spice-stained aprons argue softly about what their grandmothers said after a shortage in another port. One claims she saw the pot. The other says, pots stand in many markets after sunset, and that the lesson lived in the reading, not the reveal. Memory edits out restraint and highlights dread. It hoards the chill and spends the care. The magistrate invites a few singers to the courthouse and offers tea, not charges. He asks, who first coined living feast? Eyes slide toward the window, toward the alley cat that owns the steps. One singer admits a patron commissioned a verse to steady the crowd, then shakes his head as if the money felt light in the hand and heavy in the throat. Not proof pressure. Maps again? Notes again? You pin names beside dates on the chart from the records room, a broker who funds broadsides, a fixer who knows the band leaders, a discreet creditor whose stamp appears on both cargo invoices and song sheets. The triangle closes, and the line from warehouse to melody feels as solid as a rope drawn tight. Philosophy taps the glass. Stories that frighten the many are often hired by the few. If a city farms fear, harvests arrive on time for those who sell baskets. Dignity, by contrast, asks to be paid up front and pays back in quiet streets and honest scales. A courier bursts in with a pamphlet that claims to reveal the real method. The paper smells of fresh oil and hurry. It promises detail kept from the people by timid men and names a time and a place where the truth will be demonstrated. The magistrate's jaw sets. You weigh the sheet in your palm and feel the cheap pulp bend like a threat pretending to be a promise. You track the imprint to a back room near the press. The door stands ajar, chair tipped, lamp cold. Type lies scattered across the floor like a ransacked alphabet. On the table rests a proof that stops before the paragraph that would cross the line from rumor to reenactment. A thin groove marks where a blade once trimmed paper. Dust hangs in the beam from a high, narrow window. The alley offers only faces that forget too quickly. The peddler who hawked the woodcuts shrugs. The singer who admitted the commission has lost his voice and says he will travel inland for a season. The creditor's clerk says his employer is taken ill and closed the account until wheat ships clear the outer reef. Everyone's story turns sideways at the same corner. Night gathers and the square breathes like a single chest. The magistrate orders lanterns kept high and asks you to stand within earshot of the fountain. The promised demonstration hour nears and the crowd ripples with a hope you cannot name hope, for certainty, for spectacle, for a quick story that ends fear with a picture. You look toward the printer's door expecting a man with a stack of papers and the swagger of someone who thinks ink controls fire. No one arrives. The press room stays dark. The promised pamphlet fails to appear. By dawn, someone whispers that the printer left before midnight without a coat, without his ledgers, leaving only a clean counter and a single sheet pinned under a brass weight. No instrument described, no blood shown. Sentenced to be carried out without cruelty according to law. The sheet bears the old decree in a new font and a fingerprint in the corner that looks like ink but feels like fear. Morning air tastes like brine and ink. The printer is gone, the back room left neat, and a single pin sheet repeats the ban on animal displays in a crisp, almost defiant font. You keep your finger on the faint smudge that might be ink, might be sweat, and study the gap where the promised paragraph would have turned rumor into reenactment. The press chose silence over stain, and the city now has to choose what that silence means. First, the mystery, the imported method, lives on tongues and in a chronicle with holes where answers should be. The riddle of a pen within a box may name fraud, not fangs yet. The chorus prefers the sharper reading. If proof will not appear who profits from the shadow it casts, then the consequence, grain prices jump before the bell. Stallholders whisper about storming the granary if the magistrate keeps hiding truth. A clean decree cannot cool a fever fed by songs. Rumor spends faster than coin, and both feel scarce by noon. Here's the reversal. Dock guards detain two boys who admit to tossing pebbles beneath the planks to hear rats scurry for sport. The crate that rattled might have carried only rope and rumor, yet the guild petitions still press for frightening displays, as if order depends on a lid no one will lift. You return to the Foreign Chronicle with a stricter lens. The translator underlines 3 idioms that turn teeth into taxes when read soberly, and notes that several pages are missing in the key section. A later hand replaces them with general warnings about traitors penned by law. The metaphor reads, Civic not bodily, and the date matches a tariff reform upriver. Comparative records arrive from 2 foreign cities. Officials there faced shortages, refused spectacle, and doubled audits instead. The riots they feared never came, the press printed dry decrees, the songs found other subjects. Clarity stands like a seawall when rumor tests the tide. You gather counsel around the map. The magistrate taps the harbor scale's numbers and asks the question that keeps the room taut. Can a city survive the day if it denies the crowd its favorite picture? You answer with ledgers, not verses, and show that surcharge peaks vanish. Where staged dread was banned and inspection raised, paper breaks before it burns. Philosophy enters in a plain voice. Silence in an archive may protect the living, not the legend. Dignity is the policy that refuses to outsource order to fear. If a rule needs a spectacle, it is not a rule. It is theater on loan. A just city trades applause for trust and calls the bargain wisdom. Afternoon heat presses on the yard, wearing a skin of dust and song fragments. Street sellers push ballads that promise the scene at last, then shrug when asked for a place and time. A broker you have circled twice in your notes pays a cartman to carry broadsides that name no method, only mood. He smiles as if mood itself were merchandise. The magistrate drafts a proclamation that names the ban, plainly cites the false cognates, and forbids any public vermin spectacles as unworthy of the city's face. He orders double audits on grain weights for 30 days and a relief fund for bread to cool the morning's fear. He signs with a steady hand, then looks toward the square where expectation has already purchased a seat. Ink before spectacle. A runner bursts in from the quay, a crowd gathers at the old wayhouse. The song with the living feast line rides the air like gulls. Someone has chalked a time on the stones, daring the court to answer with pictures, not policy. The chalk marks are neat as if a careful clerk used to ledgers, not walls, set them down. The hour is early evening when hunger thinks loudest. You walk the alley behind the press once more and notice scuffs you missed in the dark. A set of small prints runs from the back door to the canal, then veers toward a warehouse with a private slip. The same broker's mark hangs over the gate, clean as new coin, and a barge there loads paper, not grain. The slip creaks, the rope sighs, and the tarpaulin rustles like a throat clearing. You lift a corner of the tarp. Beneath it, bundles of broadsides repeat the same careful euphemisms you have seen for weeks, stamped with a date one day ahead. The rumor machine keeps its own schedule indifferent to truth, and the inventory would flood the square by dawn. You leave the tarpaulin in place and memorize the count before the guard on the quay looks your way. By late afternoon, the market settles into a low growl. A child runs past with a chalk-stained hand, and a baker curses the price of flour under his breath. If the court refuses spectacle, someone promises the crowd will bring its own. The magistrate folds the proclamation twice and asks you a final time whether the city can stand without the picture it craves. Sundown waits like a held breath. The Wayhouse Square thickens. The bowl and the pot sit on the table like 2 plain anchors steady against a tide of eyes. A voice vows to show what the court hides if the magistrate reads words instead of unveiling a scene, while grain prices tick higher with each rumor tossed like a pebble ripples touching every purse. A boy grips the bell rope as every face turns toward the steps, daring the law to walk out with paper instead of a picture, and somewhere a coin flips deciding whether the night ends in calm or cracks open. The bell rope waits in a child's hand, the bowl and the pot steady on the table. Chalk numbers pale under evening light beside the wayhouse door. The magistrate holds the folded proclamation like a hinge between 2 different nights. If he denies spectacle, can a city that craves a picture stand on paper alone? Consequences stack fast, as sure as flour dust on a baker's sleeve. Prices drift higher with each whispered verse about a living feast. Stevedores mutter about hazard and short pay. Stallholders watch the clock as if time could print bread. If the square erupts, tomorrow's hunger will carry today's anger like kindling. Here's the reversal that tightens your chest. The rumor machine stands ready, not the law. A broker's barge holds fresh broadsides. The printer has vanished. The alley hums with tune before text. Policy feels late. Performance feels early. Paper over flame. Choose. The magistrate hears the jurist a final time. Read the ban on animal displays, he says, and pair it with audits and bread relief. Name the false cognates, forbid staged fear, and call dignity the city's face. The plan risks silence, where the crowd wants thunder. Guild elders arrive smelling of rain and debt. They demand a symbol with bite, something that shivers a spine without staining the square. You answer with ledgers and maps, pointing at towns where restraint steadied markets and rumor failed to breed. They listen, but their eyes keep slipping toward the covered pot. A boy walks past humming the chorus. Several more join, and the yard tilts toward song. The dangerous line is short and sticky, gluing hope to fear. Some want to see what the court refuses to show, as if certainty could be bought with a lifted lid. The grain bowl catches the last daylight and does not move. You and the magistrate step onto the weighhouse stones. He sets the proclamation on the table beside the pot, and the square leans forward. The decree's phrases sound like iron-shaped to hold human dignity. No device described, no blood shown, sentence without cruelty according to law. He could let the covered symbol sit like a threat, or he could take it away. The translator lays the foreign chronicle open to the riddle. Crate as pen, vermin as traitors, punishment as auditing routes and closing accounts. Metaphor over theater, correction over display. The magistrate lifts the page so the nearest faces can see the line. An envoy from the broker's house appears with a careful smile. He offers support for city needs if the court allows a display sufficient to settle the market. He names it a civic service and opens a purse you refuse to count. The magistrate closes the envoy's hand over the coins and nods toward the gate. The crowd swells at the edges where alleys feed the square. A few faces move like flint through wool, practiced at turning mood into flame. You recognize one from the press yard and another from the private slip. Triangles close. Patterns return. Philosophy speaks under the ribs. Courage is when a public servant chooses dignity over applause. Fear can purchase a cheer. It cannot purchase a just memory. Symbols are cheap. Repair is costly. Only one endures. The magistrate makes the first irrevocable move. He points to the pot and tells the guard to carry it back inside. The table looks smaller without its covered threat. Murmurs harden. A handful of voices call for the old proof one last time. He signals the bell, once for law, twice for clarity, thrice for calm. The child's hands tremble, then pull. The air tightens as a line of patrolmen steps to the edge of the crowd, not to menace, but to mark a boundary. The proclamation waits. The magistrate raises the paper in both hands. The square goes still enough to hear rope on wood. He looks at the chalk numbers at the bowl that smells faintly of dust and sun, and at the faces that have paid for rumor twice already. He opens his mouth to read. The first words travel like a steady oar through choppy water. No device described, no blood shown, sentence without cruelty according to law. The bell's last note hangs above the crowd, undecided. Will the square break the line, or will the line hold the square? The immediate consequence arrives as a hush that tests every rib. A pebble skitters near the weighhouse step, then rests without an echo. A couple of voices try the song's sharp phrase and lose their pitch before the second bar. Expectation searches for a picture and finds a paragraph instead. Here's the reversal. The paragraph proves heavier than the picture. The magistrate names the false cognates and reads the riddle. As it was written, crate is pen, vermin is traitors, punishment is audits and closed accounts. He reads the 30-day audit order and the bread relief schedule, and the crowd hears numbers they can eat. Pattern interrupt, a loaf breaks, steam. At the market edge, city bakers lift baskets the council purchased hours earlier. The first slices reach small hands, and the first bites lower 100 shoulders at once. Bread is politics in a crust, and today it chooses law over theater. Inspectors fan out with calibrated weights and fresh seals. They open ledgers, not lids, and record gaps, not gasps. The broker's barge is stopped at the private slip. The bundle's inside list only euphemisms dated one day ahead. Civic penalties follow fines, suspensions, forfeited surcharges, public accounting in the hall. Singers arrive late and find their chorus out of breath. The old phrase tastes stale against the sound of numbers and the smell of bread. Their patrons glance at empty purses and drift away. An alley that once sold fear now sells maps to grain depots in the hours those doors stand open. The translator writes a calm preface to the Foreign Chronicle. He explains the metaphors, the missing leaves, and the tariff reforms that birthed the riddle. He signs his name plainly and donates the copy to the courthouse wall. A city learns to read itself without flinching. Philosophy slips between ledger lines. We choose restraint at the moment, spectacle tempts us most. Mercy that guards order is not softness, it is structure. A city that refuses to frighten its own learns to feed its own. The magistrate walks the key with the jurist and nods to clerks who seal sacks with twine that does not fray. He funds lids that shut clean lanterns that burn longer and scales that agree with the harbor beam. Repair takes longer than rumor and pays better than panic. The bowl and the pot move from the table to a glass case in the records room. The plaque reads symbols used during scarcity to teach order without cruelty. School children will trace letters on the glass and ask about the year the city chose paper over show. The answer will be short. Some will still hum the old line in corners because rumor rarely starves to death. But the market no longer pays for the tune and the way how stones remember the sound of a paragraph holding a crowd. The city's face feels cleaner in the morning. The loops close as neatly as twine. The crate that rattled was boys and boards. The surcharge spikes were profit wearing fear like a borrowed cloak. The Whisper Network was a triangle you could draw with a dull pencil and still hit every corner. Justice arrives without spectacle and order holds without stain. Markets settle, songs wander. Ledgers learn to balance where stories once tilted the scale. The crowd goes home with bread instead of pictures and the record learns to breathe. Justice that spares the eye teaches the heart. Let the record stand.